Good morning. I'm Sarah Bean, editor of FMJ, and I'm pleased to say we're joined today by Dr. Stephen Wise, Chief Strategic Development Officer at Advatech, along with a panel of experts to discuss how biotechnology is helping FMs achieve their sustainability goals and reduce waste. As we emerge from the pandemic, the FM sector is stepping up to the challenge of meeting sustainability goals. But with 11 million tonnes of waste still going to landfill or for incineration each year, isn't it time we challenge the waste supply chain and made greater use of technology to help cut emissions? Today, we're pleased to bring together a group of experts in sustainability to discuss what new technologies and processes are available to support FMs on the road to net zero. I'll be putting a series of questions to our panel, but we'd love to hear from you as well. So please post up your comments or queries and I'll try to get to them towards the end of today's webinar. During the webinar, we'll also be holding a couple of online polls, just to get a snapshot of how waste is currently being processed within the sector. But before I begin, I'd like to go around the panel and get them to introduce themselves. I'd like to start here with Dr. Stephen Wise, Chief Strategic Development Officer at Advatech.
Thank you, Sarah. Yeah, good morning. As Sarah said, I'm Dr. Stephen Wise. I've spent the best part of 20 plus years within the waste and renewables sector. That's included working for waste operators such as Suez, consultancies such as Ricardo and Wood Group, and smaller companies such as Advatech. My experience is very much around the treatment and processing of waste. It's included things like anaerobic digestion, composting, biotechnology, and renewable energy.
Brilliant, thanks, Stephen. Now to Rochelle G, who's Head of Property Services Operations at Buckinghamshire Healthcare NHS Trust. Rochelle.
Hi, I'm Rochelle. I have been at Buckinghamshire for the past 3 years, and we are just starting a journey with Advatech and another waste supply with our PFI partners to introduce the system into our waste to hopefully reduce Buckinghamshire's waste taken off-site by 80% over the next 2 to 3 years.
Brilliant, thanks Rochelle. I'd be very interested to hear your experiences, especially for our FM viewers. Next we're going to Chris, who's a Programme Director at Alcaro Advisory, and he's part of the SFMI. Chris.
Yeah, good morning. Thank you, Sarah. Yeah, Chris Havers, Programme Director at the Sustainable Facilities Management Index, which is a product of Alcaro Advisory. Essentially, we go in and we assess FM providers on an annual basis to understand and score their performance and ability to embed responsible business practices across their both their own operations and also into the services that they deliver. And part of this includes how they implement the circular economy, amongst other environmental issues and social issues.
Brilliant, thanks. And last but not least, Ray, who is, I'm very happy is joining us to talk about sort of his place in the waste industry.
Hi, I'm Ray. I work for the Chartered Institute of Waste Management, and I have done since May last year. I've been in the sector for probably 40 odd years. So I've seen it change and evolve a hell of a lot over that 40-year period. I started work as a chemist in a company called Cleanaway. I worked for Veolia. I've also worked for the Environment Agency as well. So I've got quite a broad experience of the waste sector across all sorts of technologies and experiences within that system.
Brilliant, thanks. Well, when I introduced the beginning of this webinar, I mentioned that there's something like 11 million tonnes of waste still go to landfill every year, and it's known as sort of forgotten waste. Stephen, can you kind of fill us in on those stats and what's behind it?
Yeah, no problem at all. We quite rightly promote the amount of recycling that we achieve across both the household, domestic sector and the industrial and commercial sector. And in a lot of cases, we're plussing up 40%, 50% in terms of that recycling. But what we then tend to forget a little bit is the remaining waste. And the easy option has been to send that either to landfill, which is obviously not very environmentally sustainable, and much more recently into energy from waste. And again, there are challenges around building capacity for energy from waste. We export over 3 million tonnes of waste as what we call refuse derived fuel from the UK into Europe to go into energy from waste facilities there. So we're sort of wasting some of that resource here. And it's really to try and bring some of that focus onto that sort of 11 million tons, and what other innovative technologies, what other treatment methods can we actually use to work with clients to help reduce at source before it's taken away for further treatment. And again, the other benefits that brings is that you reduce vehicle numbers on roads, you're helping to cut then vehicle emissions, you're helping then to, in terms of clean air, etc. So it has a number of knock-on benefits as well. So it's really to shine a light and say, yeah, it's really great, everything we're doing about recycling, but let's actually put some more effort into that remaining residual or hidden waste, and let's see what we can do with that as well.
Brilliant, thanks. Ray, you must come across this a lot as well. I mean, has that amount of waste been reduced in your experience over the last few years, or is that something that the people are only just becoming aware of? Oh, you're muted.
Somebody's bound to make that mistake at some point. As Stephen says, I mean, the amount of recycling and recovery which has been going on since I joined the industry, I mean, back in the mid-80s when I first joined the sector, we was probably recycling something like about 10 to 15% of materials. That's come along in leaps and bounds over that period, that 4 decades or so. So we're up to around 45% in England at the moment from a household waste, municipal waste point of view. Wales are doing a heck of a lot better. They're up to about 65%, and some Scotland are somewhere in between. For commercial and industrial waste, it's always been a bit of a difficult one to measure because the information in the data is not really collected centrally, so it sits with companies. And from my experience from working at Veolia and Cleanaway prior to that, the amount of C&I waste, commercial industrial waste, which is recycled and recovered, kind of is a forgotten sort of success story, because the amount of waste which is there, which has been value's been gained from, is quite enormous. But you're right, there's still a heck of a lot of forgotten waste, stuff that people don't think can be recycled, or stuff that can be recycled, but the technology is not quite there yet to recycle it. A typical example of that might be things like expanded polystyrene, for instance. You see that quite a lot in fish boxes from fishmongers and from butchers and these kind of things. There are systems and there are ways to recover that, but it's trying to bring that volume together because it's such a light material to make that economically viable. And it's the economics which drive all of this. Yeah. It was quite stark when I read through the English Resources and Waste progress report at the end of last year that it's about 53% of residual waste, household waste that is, can be easily recycled still. So it gives you some indicative idea of, the low-hanging fruit, which is still in the residual waste stream. And a lot of that is kind of things like food, plastics, and other materials which could be pulled out and recycled quite easily if the systems were in place.
Good point. Actually, on the forgotten waste front, Chris, whenever you're doing the index, does that come up much for you when you're sort of talking to FM services companies, for instance, who get involved in advising their clients on waste management?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely an issue for sure, and I think there's a common misconception as well that everything that goes in the recycling bin actually gets recycled in the first place. And there's often an easy way out for businesses, because they select a provider who says, zero waste to landfill, for example. We have a zero target, that's our job done. But then also you have other big issues like, I think Biffa have been hauled over the coals on a government level 2 years in a row now, because they're essentially taking labelling, or they were caught labelling container ships of waste as recyclable paper, and then sending it off to another country where it can be recycled, but actually it contains all sorts of contaminated waste, which I presume would fall into this kind of forgotten waste kind of number. And so, yeah, I think there's kind of a I feel like there's a trust issue in that kind of waste recycling chain as well, which needs to be addressed. And yeah, it starts at the bin, making sure that we're doing all of the things we can do to make sure we're not sending contaminated streams of waste into the provider, and then also figuring out what the provider who's taking it on is doing with the waste as well, making sure that we have trust in them to take that information forward, and they have the right certifications and processes in place. So yeah, it's a complicated chain.
Rochelle, do you think people are aware, since you've started this process, were you surprised when you heard how much waste was sort of not being accounted for, really?
So it depends on the definition of accounted for. In a hospital environment, we absolutely yearly have to report our waste and the tonnage to our waste streams. And it's a really complicated process, but we do that as part of a return to NHS England on a yearly basis. So we're absolutely aware of how our waste is treated. And due to the sheer volume of waste streams that we have within a hospital environment, it's really tricky. And I have 4 hospitals and 2 suppliers to deal with those 4 hospitals, and we do it differently. So we're at a point, and that's why we are doing something very different at this point. For us, as the waste producer, as the hospital, the challenge comes is we have hundreds of bins, and for a busy nurse or a busy doctor or a member of the public, the assurance of what goes in the right bin is the hardest part. So what we're trying to build is a simple solution, changing vocabulary, because recycling is a really difficult word in a hospital, as everyone's described, because some things can, some things can't. And the use of the new technology we're looking at putting on sites, those words won't be used, and we'll be using these new words to try and encourage people to do that correctly.
Brilliant. That's really interesting. I mean, I suppose it takes me to a slightly broader question, which is, getting back to you, Stephen, what do you think are the biggest sort of misconceptions when it comes to waste handling? I mean, Chris sort of mentioned people saying, oh, well, it's fine, that we've got the supplier, they've sorted it, it's fine, but they're just covering their own back. They're not actually seeing where it's gone.
Exactly. I think there are 2 big challenges, and I'll start with the one that Chris mentioned, in terms of, they'll get, a client will get told, we're not putting anything to landfill for you, and unless you actually go and check that and follow it, you can't be sure, and you don't have the evidence to prove it. And we found, in roles that I've done with other companies where we've done those audits, people have said, nothing going to landfill. You go and audit it, and in fact, there is a quantity still going to landfill. They're just believing things without actually having it checked out, and it loses that trust, as Chris says. And even very recently, we spoke to another NHS trust, and they said to their waste contractor, nothing is going to landfill. When we were working with them and questioned the waste contractor, they went, oh yeah, actually we're sending X hundreds of tons of your waste to landfill. It's not going to energy from waste. And so it's being able to push the contractors to make them tell you exactly what's happening to your waste, and they have you have every right to do that, and challenge them. And the other one is human behavior. Where we're talking about here, and as Rochelle said, in places such as a hospital, putting the waste into the right receptacle, if you've got a number of them, is the last thing on say a busy nurse or a busy doctor's mind. They're not thinking about that. It needs to be straightforward. You go to places such as shopping centres, sports stadia, theme parks, etc., where actually it's very difficult to get people, if they're coming out of food halls, to go, oh, I'm going to separate all of my fast food containers and put them into all these different places. And you still have that human behavior that you will get in some of those locations, this sort of mix of what could be recycled, still paper, cardboard, some of the plastics and organic food waste, all going into the same residual bin, because it's very difficult to change that human behavior. So I think it's a combination of those two factors. And the biggest one in terms of changing is human behavior. We can change the waste contractors, you can challenge them, you can make sure it's going where they say it's going, but human behavior is the really, really big one to change. And that's the huge challenge.
Yeah, I mean, Chris, you mentioned earlier about people thinking, they'd sent stuff off and it was fine. Again, when you're looking at the FM side, if you're in a situation and people are sort of doing different bins and what have you, what how easy is that for them to police that? And if stuff is contaminated, is it still usable?
I mean, from my, so I guess someone like Ray may know more about the actual process. My understanding of the process is when you send your recycling bin off and it's got all sorts of other contamination in there, is it goes through the conveyor belt, and if there's a certain percentage of that recyclable waste which is contaminated, then all of a sudden it's shifted off because it takes so much time and effort to filter through that it's too much of a hassle to be able to then pick away all of the contamination bits. So all of the recyclable stuff goes into that contamination, and I guess then it either goes off for incineration, which I have a slight kind of issue around incineration because it's seen as a good form of energy when you have waste. But then I guess ultimately, once we start hitting our zero carbon targets, once the emissions from gases, from gas energies hit, then actually incineration becomes quite a polluting form of energy. And ultimately, burning plastics is like burning fossil fuels anyway. So it's still it's not a renewable source of energy, is it?
Ray, what's your view on that? I mean, is it the last kind of bastion of recycling? Is when you can't recycle it, then incineration is the last kind of technique to go for?
At the moment, yes. It's the go-to established system, because I mean, energy from waste has been going now for you've had incinerators, I guess, for the last 100 or so years, probably going back as far as the Industrial Revolution. They've got a lot better, I must say, since those days. The emission levels are significantly lower. And a number of operators are now looking at things like carbon capture, use and storage as well. So from a carbon point of view, it's not quite as evil as it could be if that technology comes on stream, because I think there's an open consultation on UK best available techniques at the moment around carbon capture and storage from combined heat and power, and they're thinking about including energy from waste in that technology as well. So and recently I think Suez made a big announcement about CCE US hub in the Humber area as well last year. So CC carbon capture use and storage is great. There's still a residual amount of material that is produced by an incinerator, things like air pollution control residues. That's difficult to recycle because it's generally a hazardous waste. There are a couple of technologies around which can convert that into blocks and building materials. And of course, there's incinerator bottom ash as well. That generally goes down the route of aggregates and those kind of things after metals have been removed. So there is a certain amount of recycling going on within that technology. But other technologies are coming to the fore now. Things like chemical recycling, which is using like a pyrolysis process, which can strip back a lot of the organics, like the plastics that Chris mentioned, into monomers and simple carbon molecules, so they can be built back up again. So that's probably some years off of becoming a mature technology and taking over from energy from waste. So for the foreseeable future, EFW seems to be the go-to to the landfill. And of course, from an emissions point of view, energy from waste is generally about 27% better than landfill, because methane is a far more potent greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide. So
I guess the other slight problem with that is that if you rely on energy from waste as part of the baseload energy levels, then you're not going to be reducing it, because it's the country relies on it to kind of even out the peaks and troughs. And so
you do need a baseload there to replace
but then we're not going to be
like when the wind doesn't blow and the sun doesn't shine.
Then we're not going to be but then we're not going to be reducing the amount of waste in the system, because it's relied on for the energy purposes, which becomes
and the other I think the other thing to point out is that most EFWs in the UK are not heat enabled, so there is no heat offtake. There are a few exceptional schemes, one in Leeds, one in Plymouth, for example. So, but the majority don't use the heat, therefore they are sort of 40-45% efficient. Whereas where if we export material to Europe, it has to go to one that's heat enabled, so they're making use of the heat as well. So the majority of our EFWs are very, very inefficient. We've not put the infrastructure in to support it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, there is a couple of others, Stephen, as well. There's one in Lewisham and there's one in Sheffield as well.
Yeah.
But you're absolutely right. If you can use the heat, utilize the heat from these processes, then the efficiency goes significantly better.
Yeah.
When you get R1 status, for argument's sake. But the difficulty with the heat networks is countries where we export waste to, like Scandinavia and places like that, we've got heat networks for geothermal.
Yeah.
So they just tap into that.
Yeah.
In this country, retrofitting heat networks is hugely difficult.
Plus, we don't like building stuff like that in our backyard, do we?
We're not good at infrastructure, are we?
Well, back to what FMs can actually do about this.
Sorry, yeah.
Rochelle, I mean, you've been there. What kind of questions, when you start the conversation, what kind of questions can FMs ask their waste handlers to kind of overcome some of the misconceptions, to be better informed?
So I think that there's two sides to that coin. I think partnership is something that we absolutely believe here at Buckinghamshire, working with our contractor plus our clinical teams, because if we don't do it together, we never get the end result that's correct, and that is continuous education. Especially we look at things like when the new doctors are arriving and that changeover, because that causes challenges. If we're doing a big piece of building work, how we're going to manage that waste from that piece of building work. And obviously with the COVID that has been upon us for a while now, we had to do a very big wholesale change on how we were managing our waste, because all our waste on one of our hospital sites became clinical waste, which is an extreme. And I think there's a lot of hospitals who found that everything left the site as clinical waste, because that's what the instruction was that we had. It's ever evolving, and as we've talked about, changing human behaviour is the hardest thing. There's a lot of people within the organisation who often ask us about how we look after our waste, how we treat our waste, and we don't recycle as explained by the team, because once that waste gets contaminated, it ends up as a different waste stream. And for us as a hospital, cardboard really helps that weight for it to become clean recycling. We remove the cardboard because we have another waste stream for that. So as an FM person, we've looked at this brand new solution, and I think that's a complete game changer for us. And it taught, reducing the vehicles on the road, looking at different ways of treating that waste, what that waste is called, all the way up to our clinical waste. So it's not just concentrating on one waste stream, because that segregation is so difficult on a hospital site.
That's interesting. So you've actually got different terminology now that you're using. So
part of the plan, I'm working with Advotech, and we're working. So we've there's 4 of us in partnership for this new solution, and hopefully, as Buckinghamshire, we will have a complete solution up to our clinical waste. But as I said to the team, the human behaviour change that we need to do is the first thing. So putting plants on the hospital site is the easy bit. Loosely, it's not that easy, but it's easier than the human behaviour. So working with the teams, we've made a decision. Recycling is not going to be a word we're going to use. And we've got some exciting ideas, and that's in preparation as part of the campaign to get people to buy into these new waste streams that we have, and that understand those waste streams. As Buckinghamshire healthcare employees, 6,000 people, we're going to do this simply, differently, but this is what it's called. So that's our plan.
It's a real education. And I mean, Stephen, can you, in layman's terms, talk me through kind of the approach that you've taken in terms of advising, because you're going to be advising people who are not experts, and this is what this session's for. So people who are not technologically, but they've got this huge mountain they've got to climb.
So again, we'll work with prospective clients on understanding what their waste streams are, and we wouldn't advocate putting our system in where you've got a lot, it wouldn't work on clean recyclates, it doesn't work on residual waste that doesn't have any organic matter in. So it's about, for us, understanding, working with the client on what is in with their residual stream. Right. And essentially what it's doing is allowing that residual stream to be treated at source, and the output from that then can be reduced in mass by up to half, depending on how much organic matter is within there. It's a self-contained unit. It doesn't mean that it doesn't need a lot of human input. It means that the clients don't have to change. For example, Rochelle doesn't have to then put in different bins around the place. It fits in with existing sort of waste collection processes. It's just about putting it into somewhere different. And it means that if we get that reduction coming out of the back, we then have what we call a flock. It's very much a fuel that can be used in other outlets rather than just conventional energy from waste. It moves it up what we call the thermal hierarchy. So much better for things like gasification and pyrolysis, which was mentioned about being able to extract greater value into places like cement kilns, so decarbonizing energy production. And it means you get a material that comes out the back that is about half in mass. It isn't odorous. So if there are issues, as we've seen with collections because of driver shortages, etc., whatever it may be, it's not causing an odor at the site. Right. We've seen that improve. It can be stored there. And if it's still going to landfill, which some clients will, it means it's not going to generate very much methane at all, because that organic component has been what we call stabilized. It's not going to break down any further, so generate no methane. And if it's going into a thermal process, you've got that. What's remaining is a better value in terms it's not water going into it. You've got a nice dry material that's much better for combusting. So in essence, it means that we're treating locally to have a sort of a real impact, reducing carbon emissions, reducing vehicle numbers, making an output that is non-odorous, is much easier to handle. So that's the sort of real changes. Traditionally, most waste has been taken away from site. This is adding into that chain to allow something to be done locally before it's then taken away. It's just helping reduce further down the chain.
Right, interesting. So, I mean, from the point of view both of reducing the amount of transportation, that's got to be a good thing when it comes to, Chris, when it comes to sort of meeting sustainability targets, because I know I've talked to you guys a lot about this whole Scope 3 thing, where it's not just about what you're saving within the building, it's what you're doing to reduce transport. Is that an area that you're saying FMs are starting to get a bit more interested in from their waste disposal perspective?
So yeah, I mean, we're encouraging FM providers to understand their wider emissions beyond just the direct emissions. Yeah. So yeah, one of the more easily one of the emission sources which are easily kind of imagined, should we say, is that transport of emissions, because you see it physically in the pollution and such like that. So that's it's one of the key places that companies like to start, is around those transport emissions. So yeah, it's definitely a step in the right direction for sure. And then it also has local health benefits as well, which builds into companies' social value initiatives. So if an FM provider is working, for example, with Rochelle around their facilities, then they may have social value targets to reduce local air pollution, because then that's good for the health system and such. And so reducing those air pollutants suddenly has a duo benefit for the organisation.
Brilliant, that's really useful. Ray, I wanted to speak to you because this ties in as well with your new strategy. And I was hoping, I know it's not easy, but if you can give us a very quick overview, because I know there's a lot in there. I mean,
as I've noted already, we haven't got long enough to go through this. Just to come back on Chris's point, though, about transport and transported waste, there's two things I'd just like to mention to the audience. One is that very rarely do refuse collection vehicles operate at the optimal from an emissions point of view. So they stop-start all the time. So they're constantly emitting things like NOx and sulfurs and things like this all the time. So anything that can cut that down is a good thing, or utilising the vehicles better. But there's also an evolution going on in the transport of waste at the moment. The electrification of vehicles is becoming much more feasible now. There's been a lot of very good demonstrators. Westminster Council and Veolia are doing some very good things in this space at the moment. So moving forward to 2040, when new HGVs will have alternative fuels, won't be running on diesel, the waste sector seems to be in a good place now to be able to move into that new technology much more easily now than maybe other sectors. But coming back to our strategy, right, it's based around 6 themes: pioneer and professional standards, trying to raise the standards of the sector. We've got about 5,500 members. We have just recently merged between CIWM and WAMITAB, which is the training side of the sector. So we've become one. So we've been able to sort of like roll together the two websites, the two offices, and all of these kind of things. So we've got a more sort of joined up sort of system now. Nurturing innovation, again, the age of digitalisation, it's changing at a breathtaking speed. If you went to our conference last year, Resourcing the Future, we did a whole 2 days over the accelerating pace of change, where we were looking at things like AI, robotics, digital data, and all of this kind of stuff. So these kind of skills are becoming to the fore, and it's our presidential theme this year is skills and education in the sector. So we need the skills for the future, that kind of thing. To become an advocate and an authoritative voice, myself and my director, Lee Marshall, we're making connections within not only DEFRA, but other government departments as well, particularly BAYS, particularly the Department of Transport and other government departments, as well as similar government departments in Northern Ireland and Wales and Scotland as well. So we're keeping very busy with that agenda. Engaging in connectivity, again, we've been doing things around our program of events this year. We're going to be running a series of webinars for specifically aimed at local authorities and how they can learn from each other, and case studies and those kind of things. One of those will be on alternative fuels and technologies for vehicles and yellow plant and those kind of things in the coming months. Communities and practice and leading through excellence. It's all on our website, so if you want to drill into the details of it all, either contact me via LinkedIn or have a good look at the website.
Brilliant, thank you. You did that very well. That's very
succinct. Yeah, it's very much I'm getting used to cantering through these stuff.
Yeah, I know. There's a lot to cover.
Scotland as well recently.
I've also got a techie question for you, Stephen.
Go on, then.
This one's for Stephen now.
Okay.
What is the difference between anaerobic and aerobic digestions? Because a little bit of the tech would be useful, but please make it very simple for me, at least.
So, easiest definition is aerobic is in the presence of air.
Right.
So it's composting. Anaerobic is without air being present. So think of a cow's stomach. That's essentially a biological, anaerobic digester. So aerobic with air, anaerobic no air.
Or a landfill, Stephen.
Exactly, a landfill is an anaerobic process. And the difference being aerobic generates heat and CO2. CO2 is the primary output, and anaerobic, the primary output is methane.
Right.
Now so that's the sort of difference.
That brings me neatly to my next question, which is about the Global Methane Pledge. This is the sort of the headline thing that came out of COP. How is that something that FM should be prioritising? I don't know who wants to take this first. Chris, let's throw it at you because you kind of look at it from a what is that? So that seemed to be the headline that came out towards businesses. It was the one sort of thing they could say they'd succeeded at. Let's face it.
So I mean, I guess your key sources of methane would be the likes from the waste, and then also agriculture has a huge amount of methane emitted through cows belching and fertilizers used and such. And then you've got the kind of the heavy industries, oil and gas industries, for example, which have like leakage of methane through their systems. I mean, in terms of prioritizing methane for an FM, I don't think it's prioritized necessarily. It's the emissions that come from waste is part of a carbon profile. I think the FMs and like an FM provider will concentrate more on its kind of fleet emissions, for example, like its transport fleet's direct emissions. But no, I think in terms of having a global commitment, I think it's always a step in the right direction. It's always difficult to get one of those. But yeah, I think there are definitely improvements that could be made in that particular pledge.
Rochelle, you made the point to me earlier about how much transportation costs you're going to be reducing. Can you talk us through that?
So that's about journeys, how many less collections we will need to have. So just for people to understand, obviously,
yeah,
I cover the whole of Buckinghamshire, so it's a step process that we need to go through. So we're starting on our biggest site, and currently we have waste vehicles for our 3 waste streams on site at least once a day, sometimes twice a day due to volumes that we remove coming after the weekend. We will take that down to 1 or 2 collections a week through our waste streams, and that's again through our offensive and clinical, as well as our recycling stream, as it's called at the moment. So the assumption is that we'll reduce those vehicles by at least 2/3 on our main sites. And then we have a number of vehicles that go to our smaller locations. And that's 18 locations, not every day, but some of them are every day. So our other hospitals are every day. And then our clinical sites are weekly. So with that all coming back to the main site, the reduction is going to be huge for Buckinghamshire, the amount of those vehicles that are on the road.
That's really good. I mean, that's the sort of, that is a benefit I hadn't even thought about when you talked. I was thinking of just the reduction in waste, but I mean, Stephen, that is amazing. If you start factoring that in as well.
Yeah, and that's one of the sort of main additional, you're getting into scope 2, scope 3 benefits of when we're working with the client. It's that knock-on impact, and as we said, it then can make it easier in terms of collections, because with driver shortages, etc., that have been happening due to COVID, etc. It helps relieve that pressure, so you're getting actually a benefit, a consistent and long-term benefit. Yeah,
that is brilliant. I mean, I suppose this kind of takes us to the sort of wider idea of the circular economy. I think there was a lot of talk about it around COP. Ray, I remember you guys actually issued a statement about the fact that COP had not really talked enough about the role of the waste and recycling, which just seemed to be a massive oversight.
Massive oversight. We thought that was, I mean, the link between the circular economy and climate change has been so well established now by organisations such as Ellen MacArthur and McKinsey and others, that we kind of were gobsmacked that it wasn't even so much as discussed. And the only sort of nod to it was really the methane global agreement, and not all. It's important to point out that not all countries signed up to that. It's just a few, just a majority, I guess, but not all. And as Chris says, I mean, the FM sector may not necessarily have a direct impact on that, but again, asking the question about where my material was going to, and is it going to landfill? There's the obvious question. That's the obvious effect that FM companies can have on that emission. If you don't send the waste to landfill, you don't then have the consequence methane emission. But having said that, I'm not a huge advocate of landfill, because it is an old technology now, but the landfill companies are doing a lot of work in this space about generating energy from the methane that's generated from the landfill sites. I think the capture rate is something like about 65%. But it was a huge emission, and hopefully it will be rectified at next COP this year.
Chris, what was your view on that?
I was going to ask Ray, in terms of the FMs engaging with their waste contractor and such, what kind of visibility can a waste contractor give the FM provider about where it's waste? What kind of evidence chain can they provide in order to help the waste to help the FM determine where is my waste going? How can I report this information to my stakeholders?
It's essentially all hinges around what the concept of duty of care, really. Within waste management, since it's about 30 years old now, the duty of care, there's been this concept of the duty of care. So you give the waste to a carrier, the carrier then gives it to a company to treat. That then maybe different sorts of waste streams, and some may go to incineration, some may go to landfill, some may go to recovery. And it's kind of auditing that process, really. That's the kind of thing that an FM company should be doing, should be, dare I say, grilling their waste contractors. Exactly, to find out exactly whether, because they will have that data from the duty of care point of view, they will keep that data for their own commercial purposes, as well as the legal requirement to keep it for 2 years for duty of care purposes. So it's auditing, proper audits. Waste Facilities Audit Association does that kind of thing on behalf of other companies. So it's an independent organisation. So you're not just relying on the say-so of the contractor. But yeah, it's trying to get to that information is the difficult bit. They've all got it. You just got to ask the right questions.
And I guess if we push up if everyone starts asking for it, you push up the demand, and then companies will start seeing the benefit of providing it to their
and the good news
customers.
And the good news on that the good news on data and tracking of information is that the government have just opened a consultation on digital waste tracking.
Waste tracking, yeah.
Yeah. Now, when I was working at the Environment Agency, I was involved in this project for a couple of years, and that really will fundamentally change the duty of care. Yeah. So it won't just be a two-party transaction any longer. It'll be you'll be able to see the whole chain, and all of that data and all of that information will be visible to you as a carrier, as a producer, as an FM company in a digital portal. So you can log on, you can see where the waste has gone to, you can then interrogate that information, and ultimately, and this was the hope of the project team when I was there, is that you'll be able to, once you've got sufficient data, you'll be able to apply things like artificial intelligence to it and predict with some degree of certainty where the wastes were going from that treatment facility. So if you send it to a transfer station, data will, over a number of years, will be able to be amassed. It will be able to indicate with a degree of certainty whether that material went for recovery, whether that material went for landfill, and that kind of thing. So you can then drill into that information.
Brilliant. Rochelle, you actually made a point there about cutting down methane very much at source, if you want to explain it.
Yes, something else that, and I'm sure all FM teams are looking at, is the menus that we offer to our patients. We feed thousands and thousands of people a day across hospitals, and not only through the production of food to feeding people, and if we feed people the right thing, and it reduces methane as well. So it's about not just looking at waste, it's the whole umbrella of everything that, and if we can reduce the amount of waste that comes out of food, then we've got less waste leaving the site. So it's a journey, and there's lots of things involved in that, but we're looking at that as well as our menus and how we develop our menus going forward.
Brilliant. We need to move on. We don't have that much time left. Can we talk about the consultation? Stephen, this is the landfill tax.
Yep.
How is that going to affect the waste hierarchy?
Well, again, it's a very simple, blunt instrument, but it's worked very well in terms of diverting waste away from landfill. However, we think there are further changes that can be made to that. For example, in Ireland, in the Republic of Ireland, you are able to send stabilized organic waste from the residual sector into landfill at a reduced level of landfill tax. You're not paying the full amount because you've stabilized that material. It's got to meet a threshold in terms of a test to demonstrate that, and you're then not generating methane, etc. So it's that kind of approach. It needs to be a little bit more nuanced to help encourage additional treatment of waste. So if it is going to landfill, actually what you're putting there is a material that isn't going to generate further methane when it hits the landfill. So you're getting a benefit then of having a reduced tax, and at the same time still putting the tax up further on other residual waste that goes to landfill that is still going to cause an issue. And I think encouraging where materials can be recycled, encourage them through, again, it could be quite simply that if they're some of the inert material that could be of a higher tax because it keeps it out of going to landfill. There are beneficial uses for it. So, we think it's good to review it. I think it's been very successful in driving, the sort of the development of the sector and keeping and reducing waste away from landfill. But I think it could be more nuanced now to help encourage some of these additional treatments that if it has to go that way, you're doing something to it to make it less damaging to the environment.
Great. Chris, what was your point on this?
Yeah, Rochelle touched on it quite well, actually. I think it's I think initiatives that reduce waste down out the other end and where it goes and the size of it, I think that's all great stuff. But also another key point which I think everyone needs to consider is how much waste goes into the system in the first place, and actually preventing waste coming into the system. So the reform of a landfill tax is great, but then actually can products and such be better designed in order to prevent them going into this kind of linear waste system in the first place, and can they be refurbished better, and how can we utilize the materials already, and maybe there are better tax benefits that one can provide on the production end rather than concentrating on the back end of things.
That's a very good point. Again, that was back to what Rochelle was doing. That is the real kind of nub for FMs to look right across from start to finish.
Yeah, we're trying to get the FM companies to partner to create kind of supplier engagement programs so that they can actually work with the suppliers to prevent waste coming into the system in the first place, rather than having to deal with too much waste out the back end. And that makes life so much easier for dealing with waste, and then using the products which we've been discussing earlier, then have even more impact on the system.
Ray, what was your point on that?
Yeah, I was just going to add to what Rochelle was saying about food waste. It's one of the principal contaminants in a lot of the recycling systems, and if you can minimize the amount of food waste in the first place, and then divert anything that's unavoidable, the scrapings, the peelings, etc., into the right sort of system, then you create a lot more value from your residual streams than you possibly could. Except goes back to the question at the very beginning, the forgotten waste streams and those kind of things. So food waste is fundamental, not just in this space, but throughout the whole system. Startling thing about food waste is that if it was a country of its own right, it would be the third biggest greenhouse gas emitter. So that puts it to some perspective, I think.
Stephen, when it talks about the food waste side, are you dealing across the board in terms of your client base? Obviously healthcare. Would you be dealing with retail kind of background?
So we deal with
sort of hospitality.
The hospitality sector, hotels, festivals, sports stadia, shopping centres, the whole works. And where it can be done, we obviously encourage food waste to be separated and recovered in terms of going to anaerobic digestion, where you're getting a benefit from doing that. But we know that from a lot of these locations that we're talking to, that's very difficult to actually do. Again, coming back to human behaviour, and we know that this is an intermediate step in terms of what we're trying to do here, and it doesn't solve all the problems, but it helps us move along that journey in terms of improving that until we can get other systems in place. But it's very much targeted at those locations, businesses that find it very difficult to, service stations, for example, find it very difficult to get that greater level of segregation, and that's where they face the real challenge. This helps them on their net zero journey. It helps them with their their scope 2, scope 3 emissions at the same time, and actually helps them in terms of protecting the environment further directly.
Brilliant. Thanks. We've got some time for questions. Quite a few have come in, actually. First one is, NHS has lots of soft plastic. Sorry, this is from Joe Warwick. but Veola are not able to recycle this for us as we only have small volumes across many sites. It's a community trust. Rochelle, this one's going to go to you and Stephen, I think. How are companies such as Tesco Co-op able to take back their customers' soft plastic? And any idea what companies they may be using?
So I think for us, we have a lot of community sites as well.
Right.
And I think we have to separate ourselves from places like Tesco's, etc., because our waste is different and we have to define if that is offensive, clinical or clean waste.
Right.
And that's really, really important in a healthcare environment. A lot of pressure during COVID to recycle masks and other things. And in a hospital environment, that's really, really difficult because of what we have with us. If it's clean waste, then it can go in a recycling if people segregate it properly. We've done a huge amount of work with our theatre teams, pre-anaesthetic rooms, because it is clean at that point. Once it goes past that, it becomes either offensive or clinical waste. So it's capturing the waste at the right part of its journey.
Right.
And then making sure it goes to the right waste stream.
Okay, well, that's useful.
The other, sorry, just in terms of people like the supermarkets where you now see sort of quite often cages where you can put your soft plastics into, they're able to achieve that because they take advantage then of backhauls. So you've got deliveries coming into the supermarket and, you know, almost empty lorries running back out. They're taking pallets back out, cages, etc. And they can then take advantage of that by putting the pallets onto the or the cages onto the vehicle and running it back to distribution centres where they're able to aggregate it and then send it onto a reprocessor. That's how they take advantage of it. And we did that, for example, with when I was with Shanks, we did it with M&S in terms of their residual food waste and being able to backhaul it from stores to central depots. So it's making use of existing logistic chains. And again, that makes them much more efficient if you can use what's already there. So you're helping to make them more efficient.
Brilliant.
Absolutely, Stephen. I was about to say this is exactly the same thing.
Yeah.
And of course, part and parcel of the consultations last year on EPR and consistency in collection, we'll be looking at systems to roll that out for householders as well as businesses in the fullness of time. So that change will come gradually. And again, it comes back to the point we were making earlier about fish boxes, etc. It's getting enough volume to then establish the technology to do it. It's been done on quite an ad hoc on a small scale at the moment, but it's being done. And as soon as we get more waste in that system, the more economically viable those treatment technologies will become.
I've got a specific one for you, Stephen. How environmentally friendly is the Avotec solution when gets a bit techie, both the inherent carbon footprint and emission of GHGs through biogas?
So because it's an aerobic process,
right.
It generates carbon dioxide, and in terms of calculating that, it's the same as a composting process. So it's a much lower emission of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. And in terms of its energy consumption, it's only got a very small energy consumption that can be completely renewable. And for example, if where we're talking to say island nations or developing nations that have much less developed waste infrastructure, it can run what we call off-grid through things like solar panels. So that sort of helps the inherent carbon footprint be reduced further. You're then into the materials used for constructing it, and again you can look at amounts of recovered and reused metals in terms of the frame. We try and minimize things like plastics, etc. In part of that, and these have got a long life, so they would be there for 10 to 15 years. You just maintain them, and so actually it's not consuming a huge amount of fresh resource. And as we can expand the supply chain, we will again push to use as much recycled or recovered materials as we can in a production process. We want to limit carbon production all the way through that process.
Brilliant. Rochelle, I've got a specific one for you. If you're treating waste on site, do you need to have a license from the environmental agency?
Yes. So we're on a journey, and to anyone who's going to embark on the journey, it's not do it tomorrow. So first of all, we have an added complication because I have 2 PFIs within my gift. So we're doing it through our third party. Stephen will be able to talk more, but for Stephen's waste stream,
yeah,
it's a different kind of license. But for the offensive and clinical waste stream, absolutely, and we're going through that process. It's a long process, so it is all part of the project plan to get us to where we need to be.
Brilliant. I'll go to Ray and then to Stephen. Ray, what was your point on this?
Yeah, just to make the point that not all treatment activities on site require a license or a permit. Some can be done under what they call a non-waste framework directive exemption, which allows producers to do certain things on site to their waste. Some can be done under Schedule 3 from the permitting regulations, I think it is, which is an exemption. But if you're going to do anything like that, I would certainly encourage you to talk to the regulators first to make sure that you're utilising the right form of governance, if you like, to do those kind of things. So yeah, so the full permit is not necessarily always the go-to option, because it does come with things like technical competence, planning, and all of those kind of things as well. Brilliant. So thanks. Just talk to your regulators before you want to consider that kind of thing.
Great, thank you. Stephen?
Yeah, we work with the client in terms of obtaining a permit. So we take that responsibility on board. So we'll work with Rochelle and her team, for example. So at the moment, because this is dealing with residual waste, it requires what's called a bespoke permit. So we have an application pack that we've prepared. We've got dialogue with both the EA in England, Natural Resources Wales in Wales, SEPA in Scotland, and the Irish Environmental Protection Agency in terms of working with them to put these bespoke permits in place. We're also, for example, talking to what's called the Waste Modernisation Panel in England with the Environment Agency to get either a standard rules permit applied, which makes it much simpler, or even, because it's on very small scale, perhaps an exemption in terms of being able to do that if it follows certain things. So we're working very hard to make it as simple as possible. We look after that responsibility on behalf of the client and make sure we guide that through for them.
Brilliant, thank you. We've probably just got time for one more question. There's quite a few here, but this is a nice one, I think, for everyone. Ari is saying, Rochelle's absolutely right about partnership. It must have the commitment and involvement of all the parties involved and having the proper standards. Their question is, how can we develop champions that can motivate and drive the parties involved in a waste stream to achieve the objectives of sustainability? I know we've touched on this, but it'd be good to sort of go around the room, as it were, and get everyone's. We'll start with Rochelle because she's actually in this process. Sorry, Rochelle. And just how you can motivate everyone to understand what it is they're doing.
So I think it takes all parties to bring their own motivation. And I've been really honest with Advotech and some of the other teams we're working with. I don't have great knowledge. I have a huge passion to make a change because I am challenged every day on site by my colleagues about what I do with waste. So my passion and drive is very different to my clinical teams and the teams that we're working with. We have a carbon reduction we have to drive, so we have to do that as part of what we're doing, and that is now at the forefront of everything.
Yeah,
we work in partnership with our contracting partners, and now Advotech and others are their contracting partners. So we all come to the party with different passion, and that passion drives what we need to feed out the other end. And we take our clinical teams on that journey with us. So our project is not an FM sole team. I have a working group of those people who are really passionate to keep me driven on the right lines of something. Is just one of the elements that I work with on a day-to-day basis.
That's fabulous. Chris, from your perspective, when you're looking at the index, are you finding that sometimes it's just the FM as the champion and they're having to drag, including stakeholders at the top end as well as staff along with them?
No, so I mean, ultimately, like, green champions are definitely a great force. You always have to start off with, as Rochelle was saying, the people who've got passion and enthusiasm, and you're going to find those within organisations. So you start off, and what you find is success breeds success and more interest. So there's a couple of the companies who get the platinum awards. I've seen the growth of interest in sustainability. I'm going to probably name check Bouygues Energies and Services in particular, because each year they show me the success and interest in their team around sustainability, because they're promoting it and communicating it the whole time. And now all of a sudden people are approaching them and they're saying, what can I do? Well, how can I get involved? Can you share this? So it kind of builds momentum, but you have to start off with those people passionate. And then all of a sudden sheep mentality starts to form quite nicely.
I like that, sheep mentality. That's
well, yeah, we like to be in the in club, don't we? Let's face it.
We do. Right, what about from your perspective? Have you seen attitudes change from people just throwing things away to actually, getting on board? Stu, Ray, can you hear me?
Yeah. Yeah, over 40 years, it's been quite a revolution, I think, between, the concepts about what people can and can't do with materials. As everybody says already, it's about passion. One passionate person in an organisation can make a difference, but then there is no silver bullet either. You've got to come up with a range of solutions and a range of technologies to make this kind of circular economy a reality. And as Stephen's said quite a lot already, it's all about behaviour change. How did we change our society from this make, take, throw away sort of model, this linear model, into the circular model? And it's circular economy shouldn't be viewed just simply as recycling or recovery. There's far more to it than that. There's design for longevity, refurbishment, and reuse, and those kind of things. We've got to get away from this, the new is best kind of concept. So it's trying to make society understand that concept. Comes back to my parents used to do back in the 60s and the 50s, make, do, amend. The television broke, you want to get it repaired, or or different sort of ways of purchasing. So you would have rentals as opposed to purchase, and that kind of thing. So it's trying to make that kind of mindset jump back to the future, if you kind of see what I mean.
Yeah. Well, talking of the future, Stephen, I mean, are you having interesting conversations with people with this tech, and are they finding they're getting enthusiasm? Because it sounds like Rochelle's project is a great example of that.
No, we are. It's obviously it's challenging because it's asking clients to think in a different way and look at something that's a bit more innovative and do it on site. But we're having very good discussions with the likes of certain sports stadia, other NHS trusts, even some island local authorities up in Scotland, shopping centres. It's already in operation in a number of shopping centres. We've talked to sort of cruise operators in operation with them, for example. Theme parks, it's in operation. So exactly, I think we're looking at something in a slightly different way. It doesn't fit everything, and we wouldn't try and make it do that, but it's got a very specific use for certain sectors, such as healthcare, theme parks, hospitality, etc., where we're finding very much an open door now, where they're looking at being innovative and wanting to do things in a different way.
Brilliant. Thank you so much to all of you. It's been great getting input from different sort of sides of the waste hierarchy. You really are the waste hierarchy. This webinar will be available to download. So if you had to hop in early or leave or whatever, you can watch it again. And we'll also include links to all our panelists who have kindly given up their time today. So that's Dr. Stephen Wise, Ray Paminter, Rochelle G, and Chris Havers. And thanks very much for watching. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Bye.